10 Untangling Hygiene Practices in the Wild West. Can you believe it? Back in the Wild West, staying clean wasn't easy, and most days it didn't happen at all. There were no hot showers, no soft towels, and definitely no indoor plumbing. Folks washed with cold river water, used corn cobs in the outhouse, and reached for whiskey when soap ran out. It might sound strange now, but that was everyday life for cowboys and pioneers trying to survive in a tough, dusty land. In this video, we're taking a look at the wildest hygiene habits from those frontier days. Some clever, some downright shocking, and you might just be glad you're watching from a clean couch. River water facials. When people think of the Wild West, they picture gunslingers, tumbleweeds, dusty trails, and cowboys riding into the sunset. But there's another side to the story, one that doesn't make it into the movies. It's the side where women woke up every day and tried to hold on to just a little bit of dignity, even when the world around them offered very little comfort. Let's step into their shoes for a moment. The sun's rising over the prairie, painting the sky in soft oranges and golds. The air is still cool, and before the hard work of the day begins, a woman walks to the nearest stream. There's no bathroom mirror, no faucet, no fancy soap. Just her, the land, and the water. That river? It's everything. It's where she washes her face, brushes the dust off her cheeks, and gets a few seconds to feel refreshed. The water is cold, maybe shockingly so, but it's clean, at least clean enough. She cups it in her hands, splashes it across her skin, and lets the coolness soak in. This wasn't just about hygiene, it was about claiming a moment of peace in a life that rarely slowed down. Life on the frontier was brutal. Between cooking, farming, hauling water, raising children, and surviving, there wasn't much time for self-care, but somehow, these women made time, even if it was just for a few minutes by the river. Now, this wasn't always a private moment. The West was wide open, and modesty often had to take a back seat. You did what you had to do, even if that meant washing up with others nearby. Full baths? Those were reserved for rare occasions. Maybe a Saturday night, maybe when you weren't too tired to heat water over a fire. And let's not forget, river water wasn't always safe. Bacteria, runoff, and animal waste could easily turn a routine wash into a health hazard, but there weren't many options. These women took the risk because staying clean, even just a little, meant staying strong. They didn't complain. They adapted. They made the most of what they had. That quiet face wash of the river was more than a chore. It was a ritual, a way to feel human in a place that constantly tested your limits. Picture this: a woman kneeling by a river, cupping cold water in her hands, using it to wash away the dust of the day. There were no mirrors, no creams, no fancy soaps, just grit, determination, and whatever nature provided. These quiet moments of self-care weren't about vanity, they were about resilience. And that's the kind of beauty the frontier was built on. Outhouses, the unpleasant reality. One of the biggest challenges, staying clean and handling basic needs. And few things tell that story better than the old wooden outhouse. Smelly, swarming with flies, and far from private. Now picture this. You're living out on the frontier in the 1800s. No plumbing, no bathroom down the hall. Instead, there's a little wooden shack sitting a good walk away from the house. That's your bathroom. And if you've got to go in the middle of the night, you grab a lantern, brave the cold, or worse, the dark, and hope nothing's lurking in the shadows. Stepping inside one of these outhouses wasn't exactly a pleasant experience. The smell hit you first, a thick, sour stench that hung in the air. Then came the flies, buzzing around like they owned the place. And don't be surprised if you spotted a spider or two, or something even less friendly, hiding in the corners. Toilet paper? Forget about it. Most folks made do with whatever was on hand. Corn cobs, leaves, even bits of old newspaper. Not exactly soft and definitely not sanitary. It was survival, plain and simple. But the worst part wasn't always the smell or the bugs. It was the health risk. Without proper sewage systems, waste often seeped into nearby water sources. That meant outbreaks of diseases like cholera and typhoid fever were a real threat. Something as simple as going to the bathroom could literally turn deadly. And let's talk about privacy, or the lack of it. Outhouses were often shared between families or even small communities. There weren't any locks, and the thin wooden walls didn't do much to muffle sounds. For women especially, trying to find a moment of dignity in such conditions wasn't easy. Still, as uncomfortable as they were, outhouses were a part of life. Essential, unavoidable, and a constant reminder that living in the Wild West wasn't all freedom and adventure. It was tough, it was raw, and it required people to be incredibly resilient. These days, flushing a toilet or turning on warm water feels routine. But for folks living on the frontier, those small conveniences would have felt like sheer luxury in a world where nothing came easy. Lysol, a risky solution. One of the most shocking examples about untangling hygiene practices in the Wild West? The misuse of Lysol. Yes, that Lysol, the household cleaner we use to scrub down bathrooms and kitchen counters. But back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Lysol was marketed as more than just a disinfectant. Some ads quietly hinted that it could be used for feminine hygiene. In a time when talking about women's health, especially anything related to intimacy, was considered improper, vague promises like that were enough to make desperate women take the risk. And they did. Women used Lysol as a douche, thinking it would treat infections or keep them clean. But this wasn't the Lysol we know today. The original formula was filled with harsh chemicals like phenol and cresol, ingredients strong enough to kill germs but toxic enough to damage internal tissue. The results were often devastating. Women suffered from burns, long-term complications, even infertility. And in the worst cases, it led to death. Why would anyone do this? For one, there were few doctors around, especially out on the frontier. Medical advice was hard to come by, and talking openly about female health just wasn't done. So women turned to whatever information or advertising they could find. And that's the second part of this story, the power of marketing. Lysol's ads preyed on fear and shame. They never outright said, "Use this internally," but they hinted at it, enough to convince women it was safe. That kind of manipulative marketing went unchecked at the time. There were no regulations, no health warnings, just a lot of fine print and false promises. In the end, the Lysol story isn't just about a dangerous product. It's about what happens when people don't have access to reliable medical care, honest information, or safe spaces to talk about their bodies. It's a story about shame, silence, and desperation, and how that can lead even the most well-meaning people to make heartbreaking choices. What surprised you the most about hygiene practices in the Wild West? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Bathwater sharing. For most of us, the Wild West lives in our heads as a land of frontier justice, cowboy hats, and saloon doors flapping in the wind. But what we often overlook is just how tough day-to-day life really was, especially when it came to basic hygiene. Something as simple as taking a warm bath? That was a luxury most folks couldn't even imagine. Back then, having running water or indoor plumbing was almost unheard of unless you were very wealthy. For everyday frontier families, bathing was a big chore, and not something you did every day. First, you'd have to haul water from a nearby creek or well. Then you'd need to heat it over a fire, bucket by bucket. And if you were lucky enough to own a metal tub, that was your bathtub. But here's where it gets interesting. Even if a family had a tub, they usually didn't waste water heating it over and over. So bathwater was shared, one person after another. And the order usually went like this: Dad first, then Mom, followed by the kids, oldest to youngest. By the time the littlest one got in, well, that water wasn't exactly clean anymore. Still, this was completely normal. And it's how the tradition of the Saturday night bath began. Folks wanted to be clean and presentable for Sunday church. So Saturday night became bath night across the frontier. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't more people just get their own bathtubs? Well, cost was a big factor. Even by the late 1800s, when mail-order catalogs like Sears made bathtubs more available, they were still expensive. A standard tub might cost the equivalent of $800 in today's money. That was a big ask for a family just trying to get by. And if you didn't have a tub, you might just wash up in a basin, or take a dip in a creek if the weather was warm enough. People had different standards back then. A full-body bath once a week, or even once a month, wasn't unusual. Folks just got used to it. But despite all that, families in the Wild West still cared about cleanliness and dignity. They worked with what they had. They made sacrifices. They found ways to stay clean, even if it meant reusing the same bathwater several times over. This little slice of history shows us how far we've come. Today we hop in the shower without thinking twice. Hot water, perfect pressure, fluffy towels, it's all right there. But for those pioneers, keeping clean took effort, teamwork, and a whole lot of grit. As you soak in comfort today, spare a thought for the frontier families, who scrubbed with grit, not luxury, and made every drop of water count. Infrequent showers and the consequences. There's one part of frontier life we don't hear much about, and that's hygiene. Or more accurately, the lack of it. Hot showers, daily baths, not in the Wild West. For most folks, bathing wasn't part of the daily routine. It was a rare event. In fact, going weeks without a proper wash wasn't just common, it was expected. Bathing in the Wild West? Let's just say it wasn't a daily habit. In fact, for many pioneers, settlers, and cowboys, getting clean was something you did occasionally. Maybe once a week or even less. And the reason wasn't just because it was inconvenient, though hauling and heating water sure didn't help. Believe it or not, many people back then actually thought too much bathing was bad for you. They believed washing too often could weaken your body, open up your pores, and let in illness. So instead of a nice hot bath, most folks just toughed it out. But the real issue was water. Clean, reliable water was precious. In a dry, dusty land where every drop mattered, drinking and cooking came first. Washing your face or scrubbing your feet? That was way down the list. Cowboys had it especially rough. They'd spend days, even weeks, riding through the wilderness, sleeping under the stars, and wearing the same clothes the entire time. No showers, no fresh socks, just layers of dust, sweat, and trail grime. It didn't take long for all that to catch up with them. Skin rashes, fungal infections, and nasty smells were just part of the job. And remember, this was a time before antibiotics, before hand sanitizer, and definitely before deodorant. You can imagine the health problems that came with all that dirt and bacteria. Even small cuts or blisters could become serious infections. In many cases, poor hygiene contributed to the spread of disease, not just among cowboys, but across whole towns. Still, folks did what they could. Some washed up in rivers or used cloths to wipe down at the end of a long day. But full-on baths? That was a luxury. Over time, though, things started to change. As science advanced and doctors began understanding the link between cleanliness and health, hygiene practices improved. Running water, indoor plumbing, and public bathhouses made a world of difference. You know, thinking back on how tough it was just to stay clean out on the frontier, it really makes you appreciate how easy we've got it today. Running water, hot showers, soft towels, these things we barely notice. Back then, they would have felt like a dream, and yet they still found ways to make it work. Saloon hygiene, or lack thereof. The Wild West Saloon. Just saying the words conjures up a whole world of imagery. Swinging doors, whiskey shots slammed on the bar, and a piano plinking away in the corner while dusty cowboys share tall tales after a long, hot ride across the plains. It's the stuff of movies, right? But behind that romanticized image was something a lot more gritty, and a whole lot less clean. Step inside a real saloon from the 1800s, and you'd be met with a cocktail of smells. None of them pleasant. The room would be thick with smoke from cheap cigars and pipes, the scent of stale beer lingering in the air, and the unmistakable odor of sweat and unwashed bodies. Hygiene wasn't exactly high on the list of priorities back then, and if you headed to the bar, you'd likely be served a shot of something that looked like whiskey, but was more like poison in a bottle. Known as rot gut, this stuff was often a mixture of industrial alcohol, burnt sugar, chewing tobacco, and sometimes even turpentine. It was strong, it was cheap, and it could burn a hole right through your gut. If the taste didn't get you, the morning after symptoms just might. But that wasn't the only health hazard in the room. Ever notice those towels hanging behind the bar in old Western films? They weren't for show. They were there for folks to wipe beer off their hands or clean the foam off their mustaches. Only problem was those towels were rarely, if ever, washed. Everyone used them over and over again. Imagine dozens of people dabbing their faces with the same filthy rag, day in and day out. It was basically a germ highway, spreading who knows what from person to person. And forget about clean glasses. In many places, a quick dunk in a basin of murky water passed for washing. That same glass might be used again and again without a proper rinse. Combined with limited access to clean water and poor understanding of bacteria, it's no wonder illnesses spread so easily. This wasn't just a saloon problem, it was a symptom of the times. Frontier towns didn't have running water, sewer systems, or health regulations. Medical care was scarce, and most folks didn't yet grasp the link between germs and disease. So places like saloons, crowded and unhygienic, became hotspots for outbreaks of illnesses like cholera, dysentery, and tuberculosis. Before you picture a Wild West saloon as just a rowdy good time, remember this. Behind every shot of rot gut and every clink of a glass was a very real struggle with dirt, disease, and survival. It wasn't all card games and bar fights. It was a rough, raw, and often filthy slice of American history. Bug-Infested Beds. Now picture this. You've spent the entire day riding across unforgiving terrain, the sun beating down on your back, your muscles sore, and all you want is a good night's sleep. But instead of a warm, cozy bed waiting for you at the end of the day, you're staring down at a rough pile of straw tossed together on the cabin floor. It might have looked like a bed, but it sure didn't feel like one. There was no mattress, no clean sheets. Just straw or hay, maybe stuffed into a sack, maybe not. And as you sank down into it, the real problem began. The bugs. You see that straw? It was home to an entire ecosystem of creepy crawlers. Lice, fleas, mites, and yes, the dreaded bed bugs. These little guys weren't just a nuisance. They were relentless. They bit. They burrowed. They multiplied. And if you thought you were going to get any decent shut-eye with that going on, think again. Some settlers tried tricks to fight back, hanging their bedding out in the sun to smoke out the insects or sprinkling herbs and ashes to ward off pests. But nothing really worked for long. Beds became battlegrounds and bedtime? It was more like survival mode. And let's not forget, this wasn't a one-time thing. This was night after night. Being exhausted didn't mean being rested. It meant crawling into a makeshift nest, praying the itching wouldn't start too soon, and hoping to wake up without too many new bites. And yet, people carried on. This nightly struggle says a lot about life in the Wild West. It wasn't just about outlaws and cattle drives. It was about scraping by, making do, finding a way to sleep, even when your bed turned against you. Today, we don't think twice about clean sheets, bug-free pillows, and memory foam. But back then, a peaceful night's sleep was a rare luxury. It's a small reminder of how far we've come from the rugged, restless nights of the Wild West. If you were transported back to the Wild West for one night, what hygiene item would you smuggle with you? I bet bug spray is going to be a popular pick. Creative toilet paper alternatives. Close your eyes and think of the Wild West. Your mind probably jumps to cowboys riding across wide-open plains, saloons with swinging doors, and maybe a good old-fashioned shootout at high noon. But life back then wasn't all daring gunfights and dusty adventures. In fact, one of the biggest challenges pioneers faced didn't involve horses or outlaws. It happened in the outhouse. That's right. Today, we're diving into one of the less glamorous realities of frontier life, going to the bathroom without modern toilet paper. Now, before you chuckle, think about it. The comforts we take for granted today, a clean restroom, soft two-ply, a scented candle even, didn't exist back then. For folks living on the edge of civilization, indoor plumbing was unheard of, and toilet paper? That was a luxury few could afford or even find. So, what did people use instead? Let's just say they got real creative. First up, the humble corn cob. That's right. Once the kernels were stripped for eating or livestock, the leftover cob didn't go to waste. With its firm texture and natural ridges, it actually became one of the go-to solutions for personal hygiene on the prairie. Sure, it wasn't soft or gentle, but it was everywhere, and reusable, believe it or not. Some folks would rinse them off and hang them up for next time. Now there's a sentence you didn't expect to hear today. Next, we've got leaves. If you knew your plants, you could find some fairly soft ones that did the trick. Broad leaves from trees like mullein or sycamore were popular picks. Of course, this method came with some serious risks. Pick the wrong plant, and you might end up with a rash in places you really don't want one. Poison ivy? Yeah, and not a mistake you'd want to make twice. Then came newspapers and catalogs. As printed materials became more common, especially in the late 1800s, families started putting old papers to use. Literally. That big Sears Roebuck catalog hanging in the outhouse? You could read it, then rip a page right out and use it. Talk about multitasking. In fact, some companies started printing catalogs with softer paper, knowing full well where their pages were ending up. Now here's a fun fact. The first commercially available toilet paper in the United States came from a man named Joseph Gaiety in 1857. He sold medicated paper in flat sheets, advertised as a health product meant to prevent hemorrhoids. It was made with aloe and came in a box. Fancy, right? But it was expensive, and many folks just couldn't justify spending that kind of money on something they were literally going to throw away. So, Gaiety's paper was mostly reserved for wealthier, city-dwelling Americans. It wasn't until the 1890s that toilet paper on a roll finally appeared, thanks to the Scott Paper Company. But even then, it took a few decades to catch on across the country. For rural families in the West, old habits die hard, and corn cob stayed in use well into the 20th century in some places. This entire story might sound a little gross or funny to us today, but honestly, it's a testament to the resourcefulness of frontier families. They didn't have much, but they made it work. They turned whatever was around them, plant life, paper scraps, farm leftovers, into something useful. It's one of those little windows into the past that reminds us just how different life used to be. It also puts our modern comforts into perspective. Next time you run out of toilet paper and start to panic, just think. At least you're not reaching for a corn cob, or hoping the catalog hanging in the bathroom has a few pages left. If you had to use one of these old-school toilet paper alternatives, which would you choose? Unconventional Medicines. Out on the wild frontier, getting sick wasn't just inconvenient, it could be downright deadly. With doctors few and far between and hospitals almost unheard of, pioneers were left to face illness with little more than guesswork and grit. Germ theory was still a fresh idea, barely taking root, and modern sanitation was a luxury most folks couldn't even imagine. So when a cowboy found himself battling a fever, toothache, or nasty wound, he didn't head for a clinic. He reached for the nearest bottle of something strong and hoped for the best. Take toothaches, for instance. In the 1880s, one of the most popular over-the-counter remedies was cocaine drops. Yes, you read that right. Pure cocaine, sold in tiny glass bottles promising fast relief. And it worked, at least for a while, numbing the pain and giving the user a jolt of energy. Of course, the long-term effects were far from safe, but back then it was considered perfectly acceptable medicine. But that wasn't even the strangest remedy on the shelf. Laudanum, a potent mixture of alcohol and opium, was the catch-all cure for everything from insomnia to stomach cramps. Widely available and cheap, it became a staple in many homes. The problem? It was extremely addictive, and many users couldn't quit once they started. Then there was mercury. Yes, the same toxic metal we now know causes serious harm. In the Wild West, it was used to treat syphilis and other infections. Some folks rubbed it into their skin, others swallowed it. The results? Often worse than the original illness. And arsenic? That had its moment too. Believed to purify the blood or clear the skin, it was taken in small doses despite its well-known toxic effects. Unsurprisingly, it didn't lead to glowing health, just more danger. That's Wild West American medicine. Raw, risky, and a little bit reckless. Not all frontier medicines were disasters, though. Toward the end of the 19th century, aspirin emerged as a game changer, a reliable pain reliever that didn't come with such terrifying side effects. It marked the start of a new era in medical science. The Wild West was a place where people had to get creative with their health. With no real oversight, no standardized testing, and very little reliable information, they relied on word of mouth, hope, and whatever they could get their hands on. The next time you reach for a pain reliever or visit a doctor, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. Because back then, medicine was wild, just like the land itself. What do you think is the craziest medicine they used in the Wild West? Was it the cocaine drops, the arsenic tonics, or something even weirder? Whiskey as a meal and a cure-all. Campfires, starry skies, and plates full of beans and bacon. That's the picture often painted of supper time on the frontier. But reality didn't always match the myth. Some nights there was no hot meal waiting. Just a worn bottle passed around the fire, filled with harsh, burning whiskey. And for many cowboys, that was dinner. Out on the frontier, food could be hard to come by. Long cattle drives, harsh weather, and the sheer distance between settlements meant that cowboys and pioneers couldn't always count on a hot meal. So, when supplies ran low and bellies went empty, whiskey became the go-to substitute. Now, don't get me wrong, whiskey didn't exactly replace a steak dinner. But with its high alcohol content, it gave folks a quick hit of warmth, a sense of fullness, and maybe just enough buzz to forget they were hungry in the first place. It was liquid courage, liquid comfort, and sometimes liquid dinner. But the role of whiskey didn't stop there. In the Wild West, it doubled as a cure-all. Got a cold? Take a swig. Toothache? Gargle it. Snake bite? Pour it on the wound, then drink the rest. Cowboys believed whiskey could fix just about anything, and in a world without urgent care clinics or modern medicine, it was often the only thing they had. Sure, whiskey did have some mild antiseptic properties. It could clean a cut or numb the pain. But let's be honest, most of its healing power came from the fact that it made you care a little less about how bad you felt. The problem was, too much reliance on whiskey came at a price. Drinking instead of eating meant missing out on the vitamins and nutrients your body desperately needed. Over time, that could lead to weakness, poor immunity, and even malnutrition. And when folks used whiskey to treat every ailment, real health issues sometimes went ignored until it was too late. Still, you've got to admire the resilience. These were tough people, living in even tougher conditions. When there wasn't enough food to go around, or no doctor for miles, they used what they had. And often, what they had was a well-worn bottle of the hard stuff. The next time you sip a whiskey neat or pour a shot into your glass, take a second to remember the cowboys and settlers who saw that same drink as more than just a nightcap. For them, it was survival. Well, there you have it. A dusty, gritty, and sometimes downright gross trip. Through a time when staying clean was anything but easy. These days, we've got warm running water and soft toilet paper. But back then, just having a bucket of clean water or a dry towel felt like a luxury. Thanks for sticking around till the very end. And if this made you feel just a little more thankful for modern life, then we've done our job. Don't forget to subscribe and share Past Not Past with someone you know.